Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 5 of your textbook on utilitarianism and John Stuart Mill. A very, very interesting theory and one that has been discussed many times. So hopefully you'll get some things here that you can think about in the days to come. We talked about egoism in the last chapter, and today we want to talk about utilitarianism. There are two ethical theories that differ in their focus, and I think quite interestingly so. Utilitarianism is a big word, and it means actually it emphasizes the good for the greatest number of people. When you're an egoist, you are working on the good for yourself, basically. And so the utilitarian idea is that you're working for the greatest amount of people. In contrast, egoism emphasizes your self-interest as the basis for ethical decision making. Utilitarianism emphasizes promoting the happiness for the community. What you probably would not want is someone in politics that is all about themselves, trying to promote their own good, trying to make as much money off of the position as they could when they should be there for the good of the country. I think somewhere along the way we've kind of lost that sense in our American politics, and we've come to the point that we no longer really see that in many of our politicians. A statesman, the word we used to use for people that were there for the good of the people, for the good of their state. Those seem to have been lost starting probably in 1974 when Richard Nixon was removed or resigned from office for all of his malfeasance and wrongdoing. So let me go to the slides, and we'll look at some things there to guide our thinking as we think about utilitarianism and what that means and how John Stuart Mill came to figure into that. Utilitarian point of view is, again, taking into account the general happiness of everyone, maximum good consequences. What can we do that would prove to make the greatest number of people happy? Utilitarian reasoning might run counter to some intuitions about basic principles that we have talked about. And, we might ask the same question about something negative like torture. Should we use torture on terrorist suspects if we think this might save lives? Does the ultimate good of many outweigh the means that we get there? Interestingly enough, it was this theory that we put into place during the Iraqi and Afghani war when we changed the way we treated prisoners of war and set up Gitmo down off the island where Cuba is, and we could take our combatants that were captured on the battlefield there and could use unconventional means to get intelligence from them. And that was, I think, a dark day in American history because before, when a prisoner was touched American soil, they were given American rights and the right to a lawyer, the right to, being charged, the right to habeas corpus, all those things. But when we use Gitmo, it was not like that. There are people that have been at Gitmo now for years that we have. I think we've pretty much defunded that site, but they were there for years without ever getting to appear before a judge, getting a fair trial. All those things that we as Americans hold to be a basic part of who we are as a person. So those are things that we need to think about as we think about this. From a historical background, there are two men that I want you to know from this discussion of utilitarianism. One is Jeremy Bentham, who originally came up with the idea of utilitarianism. He was quite an interesting guy. In fact, when he died, he was stuffed. His hands, feet, hands were kept, and they were stuffed and put into this and preserved and put into this dummy on the college where he taught, and they bring him out on board meeting days, and he votes present but not voting. So a little weird, but he actually came up with this idea. John Stuart Mill, whose father was an adherent of Bentham's theories, would take it on to the next level. When we think of someone that's a utilitarian, we think of people generally who are democratic, who are progressive, who may be empiricists, who are optimistic. Those four things define who these people would be in this group. They believe that when interests of various persons conflicted, and we've talked about that that we have different views, different ethical backgrounds. Our ideas tend to conflict sometimes. When that happens, the best choice was that which promoted the interest of the greatest number of people. So make the greatest number of people happy with your decisions. You cannot make everybody happy. You can't please everybody. But the next best thing would be to make as many people happy as you could. Utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism, which focuses on the consequences of a person or a person's actions. Mill's principle of utility said the morally best alternative, if you have to choose between sides, is that which produces the greatest net utility. So we ought to do that which produces the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number of people. You realize that's the only way we can rule in a democracy. You cannot make every group in this country happy, but so you have to pick that which makes the greatest number of people happy and pass those things. Utilitarianism talks a lot about pleasure and happiness. It kind of reduces everything down to those two things. It's very similar to the old Greek ideas of hedonism or Epicureanism. And it's worth thinking about those old ancient philosophies. It's very close to that. But Mill said we ought to consider the range of types of pleasure in our attempts to decide what the best action is. There's a whole range of, some things are more pleasurable than others. Some things are better than others. Sometimes someone has well said that most times we choose the good at the expense of the best. So there's a whole range of choices that we make in life. Not all of them are the best choices. Sometimes they're good choices. Sometimes we make bad choices. But so these things have to be considered when we are choosing, for the good of the group. If you're an egoist, you say, what's the best for me? How do I get ahead? How do I get the most money? When you're making that choice for the country or for a group of people, it's how can we make the largest group of people happy? So how do you calculate the amount of happiness? Bentham said the happiness or pleasure of all who are affected by an action or practice that is to be considered. Look at the happiness of everybody, and then you calculate based on these things: pleasure without pain, intensity, duration, fruitfulness, and likelihood. Those were his standards. Bentham considered the quality of pleasure and happiness brought about by the various acts. What kind of, is it temporary pleasure as opposed to longer term? Mill says the quality of the pleasure ought also count. Mill said intellectual pleasures are better than sensual ones. So he's thinking much more about intellectual, mental ideas, things you enjoy mentally. Those kind of pleasures are much better than just, not on the town partying or whatever. There are different kinds of pleasures. And so the ones that do you the most good would be going to a concert or going to an art gallery. Those kind of pleasures would bring about greater happiness than, getting drunk out of your head or taking drugs or forgetting where you are because you've been on a drug bench for a week. Those may give pleasure, but those aren't the kind of pleasures that lead to lasting happiness. So there'd be a problem. So there are problems when you evaluate something based upon this utilitarianism. Nobody can look at all the variables involved in happiness. What are the variables involved in you being a happy person? It's not just one thing. People say, well, if I had $1 million, I'd be happy. No, you wouldn't. Because then you'd have cousins you didn't know come out of woodwork. And like the lady I saw in the paper the other day, who got $280 million and was broke in a year, and her church sued her because she didn't pay her tithes on the money. That brought a lot of unhappiness in her life. That money was gone. I had friends back in the 1980s who won the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes, won $100,000, which in those days was quite a lot of money. They weren't very astute in what they did. They ended up building a $100,000 house, which was in 1980s quite a house. Didn't have any furniture. They're sitting on milk crates. So what happened to their happiness? They had a new home. They just couldn't afford to outfit it and enjoy it. So they ended up having to sell it because they just didn't have enough money to do that. Utilitarianism can be an affront to our personal integrity. Sometimes doing the good for the greatest number of people may go against our own feelings of integrity. The ends justifies the means can sometimes do more harm than it can good. So one way of looking at this is what's called the trolley problem. It's a thought experiment that presents a moral dilemma. In the scenario, you have a trolley that's heading toward a group of 5 people who are standing on the track. And you have the option to divert the trolley onto a separate track where there's only one person standing. So it's either going to be the trolley kills 5 or kills 1. And the dilemma is whether to divert the trolley to save the 5, but sacrifice the 1 person, or let the trolley continue on its course and kill 5 people. That is a ethical dilemma. Which do? You sacrifice the 1 for the many. So again, does the end justify the means? And there's a lot of different aspects. You'll be looking at some of that in your case study this week, but think about that, what that would mean. The rule utilitarianism, there are 2 types of utilitarianism. There's act and there's rule. Act utilitarianism focuses on the consequences of a specific individual act. Rule considers the consequences of some practice or some rule of behavior. How does it produce the greatest amount of good? So those 2 things, think about that when you're reading. Act utilitarianism evaluates every individual action based on its ability to maximize overall happiness. Rule utilitarianism evaluates actions based on the general rule or principle that will lead to the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. So Mill says the proof of utilitarianism is that good is defined in terms of what people desire. Whatever, if you give people what they want, it's a good thing. Happiness is the only thing desired for itself. So it's the only intrinsic good would be happiness. You desire happiness among everything else. Utilitarianism is highly influential. It's a moral theory that influences a wide variety of policy assessment methods that we think about in our government. So Mill's definition would change a bit. It came to mean actions are right when they promote happiness, actions are wrong when they promote the opposite of happiness. Measuring the quality of pleasure and pain, keeping pain at a minimum, pleasure at a maximum would be the ultimate end of this theory. So how do you do that? And then, that's called the proof principle. How do you prove that something is maximally happy or not? So there's nothing in reality that is desired but happiness. Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He puts it in the top 3 things that human beings would value. So when you think of utilitarianism, think about trying to do the most good for the most number of people. This happened recently with another couple that won the lottery, like $388 billion, and everybody came out of the woodworks wanting them to give money. Well, they could have stood there all day and just handed out money. They decided instead that they would do something that would benefit everybody equally. They lived in a little town, I think in Missouri somewhere. So they went in, they bought property. The town did not have a fire station or an EMS station. They built the fire station, EMS station. They bought new trucks, new equipment, and they funded the payment of those EMS workers and firemen for their town. So everybody got the benefit equally. They went out and built a park with a place for kids to go and play and enjoy the atmosphere. Those kind of things. That would be giving people, helping the maximum number of people, and would be really a great way to look at this particular section of our studies. Thanks for thinking with me on this subject today, and I hope that it will mean something to you as you go forward and think about how we make decisions in our lives every day. We can make one person happy, or we can make a maximum number of people happy. And that may have far-reaching effects on our lives and how we do things. Thank you.